Ever grappled with love's intricate layers? I have. My journey came to a screeching halt with a heart-wrenching confession. My wife, Katie, the woman I pledged my heart to, dropped the bombshell. I love you, Tom, but I realize I still love Greg too. Suddenly, my secure world was upended, revealing a hidden affair with Greg, her high school sweetheart, now back in our lives. This is my story, a tale of confronting the shadows of past loves and the quest for closure. Enjoy watching it. Were you aware that the normal high school romance lasts around 3 weeks? Katie Thomas and Greg Hollander defied that statistic by a whole 40 years. They initially met when Katie was a freshman and Greg was a sophomore. They became inseparable after that. Indeed, theirs was a true, even mythological love that stood the test of time and stayed pure. Interestingly, Kat and I were married for around 30 of those years. At the time, I believed that our bliss was genuine. Our marriage was satisfying, and the arrival of our daughter Joan further strengthened our love. Overall, I was content during those years. Allow me to present someone who can update you on this critical development. My name is Thomas Marsh, and Katie has been my loyal wife for almost 3 decades. As previously stated, Kat and Greg were high school sweethearts, and she did lose her purity to him. Most high school romances terminate eventually. However, Greg was a year ahead of Katie in school, so it appeared to be a temporary hiatus. He planned to gain fortune after graduation so that he could marry her. This was a story my wife frequently told during our marriage. Following high school, Greg took a pipeline job in Alaska with his uncle, which signaled the start of difficulties. Greg seemed to have stopped communicating soon after his arrival, leaving Kat alone throughout her final year. She considered dating someone named Sam or Simpson, but her heart remained fixed on Greg. Despite Kat's patient waiting, Greg remained silent and uncommunicative. Greg evidently found fulfillment in pipeline work and has chosen a nomadic existence. Convinced that his beloved Kathy was still waiting for him to become wealthy and sweep her off her feet. Upon his return, reality revealed a different image. Life continues as usual, and nothing remains still. This was true for Katie, who went to college, graduated, and met me at a party when she was 24. Despite the fact that I was 29 years old, we were a good fit. I instantly fell for her, and I believe she felt the same way about me. Our marriage was ordinary, with the exception of one tiny hitch. 2 days before our wedding, Greg Atkins sent a letter to the prodigal son returning home, encouraging Kat to meet him. Thankfully, Kat's mother interfered, telling her to concentrate on her new life and not waste time with Greg, whom she referred to as that junk. Following some emotionally charged moments in which I feared Kat may cancel the wedding, she went ahead with it, becoming my wife, Mrs. Katia Marsh. We were already on our honeymoon when Greg showed up, and he had evidently enlisted in the Marines out of desperation. After our honeymoon, we settled into our new routines, with Kat working as a nurse and me as an insurance adjuster for a major corporation. While my marriage remained strong, there was one reoccurring concern. Greg began texting Katie, and she reacted willingly. When I questioned the necessity of this, she grew defensive, claiming he was merely an old acquaintance in need of help. Being unmarried and in the Marines, she was simply writing to brighten his spirits. I can't claim ignorance because I was aware of his continuous correspondence with her and her return letters. Despite my and her family's best efforts, she persevered until news arrived that he had married someone at his station, effectively ending their communication and restoring my peace of mind. Over the next 3 years, she only received 3 Christmas cards from Greg. During this lull in communication with Greg, our daughter Joan was born, carrying our newborn. Kathy and I banded together and worked tirelessly to construct a home and farm to provide Joan with a comfortable existence. Those were good days, and we worked together well to nurture and grow our child. However, as is frequently the case, a disruption occurred. Katie received a letter from Greg but never discussed it. I noticed our stamp consumption growing, which led me to believe she had restarted correspondence with him. Despite this, I chose to ignore it, believing it was his responsibility to safeguard democracy while I secured my family's safety. If they choose to write to one another, I considered it their business, regardless of my feelings. Kat eventually began discussing with me some information she had gleaned from Greg. He divorced his first wife and remarried. He had seen war and was presumably well decorated. Katie spoke with pride about her former Marine, and I paid only partial attention. I gently corrected her, reminding her that he liked to be called a Marine, not a soldier. Katie chuckled softly and said she should be cautious. Her discussion of him made me sad, but I hoped that one day she'd move on and focus on our family. Unfortunately, that day never arrived. Greg had been in the Marines for 30 years, gone through 3 marriages and divorces, and earned enough decorations to match General Patton. I realized with disappointment that, although Greg had become more appealing to my wife over the years, I had merely gotten older and more predictable. My only relief was the notion that Greg would settle far away from us after his release. Unfortunately, this was not the case. And here we are now. Our daughter, Joan, has grown up and married a great man called Frank Campbell. Even better news, they're expecting their first child at the age of 60. I look forward to reaching the age of 65, when I will be able to retire and spend the rest of my life in peace and tranquility. Katie is still as beautiful as ever and has the ability to make my heart skip a beat. Little did I know that the tranquility in my life would soon be destroyed. One Thursday, when I returned home, I discovered Kat dressed impeccably and advising me of a dinner reservation at 7. Initially perplexed, I scanned my memory for any forgotten anniversary or birthday, only to discover that this was not the case. So I went along with it, going into our bedroom to freshen myself and try to match Kat's elegance. Dinner was wonderful, and the restaurant was full, so I suspected Kat was thinking about anything more than just eating. As we finished our dinner, I turned to her and said, "Okay, now you can tell me I'm in a good mood and won't cause a scene. One of my characteristics is that I never lose my cool in public. Working in the insurance industry teaches you to maintain your cool in public, and that practice has carried over into my personal life." Kat realized this about me throughout the years when she had something possibly distressing to say. Choose a public place to deliver the news. Looking at her expression tonight, I could tell something was wrong. After 30 years together, you learn to read your mate. Tonight, I was paranoid that something would go wrong and ruin my evening. Finally, with trepidation, she announced the news. "Tom, I think you should know that Greg has returned." I felt nauseated, but I knew it wasn't from the food. I stared at her, eager for further information, but Kat only looked at me carefully. Finally, I interrupted the uneasy silence. "When you respond, do you mean he's returned from vacation?" She shook her head and whispered quietly, "No, Tom, he is not on vacation. He got discharged from the service and purchased a home 2 streets away from us. With that, my worry level rose, and I quickly interrupted. And he'll be living there with what? His third wife?" "Again," she said quietly. "No, he divorced again, but this time he had to forfeit a portion of his pension because of her. I tried to control my rage, but I couldn't stop muttering rubbish. It's simply too much." Some neighboring diners looked at me with amazement. My swearing was not because Greg had lost a portion of his pension to his ex, but because he had relocated closer to us. And I needed to understand why. I grew more forceful. "Katie, you have not met Greg, have you?" Her expression answered my inquiry. She didn't even answer to my following question. When and how did this occur? "Katie?" She likewise responded with a slightly downcast expression. "He stopped by our house yesterday to let me know that we are officially neighbors." My heart was beating, and I resumed the interrogation, fearful of what I could discover. "Did you sleep with him, Kat?" Her expression said all before she confessed. "I did it, Tom. But it's not as you think," I nearly roared as I looked into her eyes. "Kat, I believe my devoted wife slept with someone other than her husband. Now explain why this isn't what I believe it is. I did it because Tom needed me. When he approached me, he appeared disoriented. He's dealing with anxiety or something related to his divorce. And he really needed me, so I attempted to help him. I adore you, Tom, but I've realized I still love Greg. So, there it was. My wife had slept with Greg, and he used PTSD and divorce to get back into Kat's heart and bed. I stared her down and spoke as strongly as I had during our marriage. "Okay, Kat, the damage is done. We can get through this and take back our lives. But you cannot sleep with him again. Do you understand?" She looked at me sobbing and spoke calmly but forcefully. Tom, I can't promise that. I adore him, and he needs me more than you. It was upsetting to hear those remarks from her, yet a public restaurant was hardly the appropriate setting for our private strife. I asked the waiter for the bill. 10 minutes later, we were driving home when I brought up the topic again. Kat, how can you be with him when you already have a husband? Have you forgotten the vows we made over 30 years ago? Remember to disregard all others. She started crying openly in between sobs. Confessed. I apologize, Tom, but he needs me. We discovered each other again. I cannot bear the prospect of losing him or you. I didn't know what to say or do to get her to let him go. With a tinge of annoyance in my voice, I yelled, "So what then? Should we take turns having days off? He gets you for New Year's while I get you for Christmas. Stop it, Kat! You cannot have two males." She stopped crying and gave me a weird look. What about a break, Tom? Now it was my turn to be humiliated. What are your suggestions, Kat? She changed the subject. Tom, do you recall approximately 18 years ago when you took a year off to pursue your master's degree? You completed the necessary tasks and returned to your job and everything was good. I shook my head irritably. Kat, how can you compare my earning a degree that benefited my family and the firm to your participation with this guy, which only benefits the two of you at this point? I pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine. Kat stretched out and caressed my face, making a passionate plea. Tom, I missed my final year of high school with Greg, and if I had, we might not be in this predicament tonight. Give me this year, and we'll be rid of Greg. And I pledge to be the best wife for you. I need this time. Tom, please. I felt a mix of sadness, hurt, shock, and depression. The need to grip Katie's neck and squeeze till her eyes faded rushed within me. However, I remembered stories about incarceration and how Koo's spouses gave up their freedom and possessions in bouts of wrath. I said, all right, Kat, if this is truly what you want, feel free to proceed. But it's important to highlight, do not expect my approval. And let me be clear, I do not want to see or hear from you in any manner for the full year. Understand? Also, keep in mind that in a year, you may not have anyone to return to. I hoped that the tight limitations I imposed for her vacation would temper her enthusiasm, but it seemed fruitless. She seemed oblivious to my words after agreeing and kissing my cheek. She thanked me and promised me that I would not regret it. I shook my head, indicating that it was too late and that I had already regretted it. That night she craved intimacy, but I opted to ignore her. The notion of her with Greg made me nauseated, and I couldn't endure physical contact as we prepared for bed. I grabbed a pillow and told her I'd sleep in the guest room. I noticed it badly hurt her, and part of me was relieved, hoping she might reconsider her plans. The next morning, I awoke hoping that the previous night had been an anomaly and that Kat would alter her mind in the light of day. I was mistaken. When I entered the kitchen, she was preparing breakfast, looking as if she had just won the lottery. She grinned at me and pointed to the calendar hanging on our wall. I couldn't help but note how today's date, June 6th, was surrounded by a thick black line. I sat at the table. I considered the irony of the date. In 1944, hundreds of soldiers and sailors struggled to free Europe from tyranny. But today, I lost my wife to another oppressor. Katie was almost ecstatic as she served me breakfast and placed it in front of me. She responded, I understand your concerns, my love. But a year from today, I'll be completely yours. I really need this time to figure things out and clean my mind. I assure you that you will not be disappointed. She grinned blissfully at me before proceeding. I called Greg this morning while you were still sleeping and informed him of your authorization for my vacation. He will pick me up in an hour. Every word she spoke made my heart sink, but I felt driven to give her another chance. Kat, you do not have to go through with this. I encourage you to reconsider. You can't guarantee that in a year you'll be free of it. Concentrate on releasing yourself from his grip and attempting to heal our marriage. Please do not risk destroying what we have. She talked softly and smiled at me with a sense of superiority. Tom, I appreciate your love in providing me this time. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Our marriage will be even stronger when I return. Now, honey, I need to finish packing, so finish your breakfast. With that, she fled the kitchen, officially ending our marriage. Despite the awful lunch, I finished it and went to get dressed. As I entered our bedroom, I noticed Kat's 3 enormous suitcases, each packed with her possessions. She smiled at me tenderly and said, "I think I have everything I need. Please deliver these bags to the porch for Greg." I looked at her blankly before responding. No. Her look changed to astonishment when I refused. I continued my nasty answer by adding, "Listen, if you're determined to end a 30-year marriage, you and that moron can carry your bags together. I will not support you in this ridiculous endeavor. Is this clear?" Kat, on the edge of tears, retorted angrily, "He's not an idiot. Greg is a nice man and a hero who has served his nation. He's accomplished more than you ever have." I moved away, murmuring, "Yes, he received medals while I worked 5 days a week to provide for you and our daughter. You may be correct, but it was meaningless." Katie carried all of her stuff down the stairs to the driveway, giving me contemptuous looks with each suitcase she grabbed. Soon later, a car arrived at our house, and a man, whom I assumed was Greg, began loading her items from our porch. Katie shouted to him that she'd be right there before returning to say goodbye. We stood awkwardly facing each other, and I broke the quiet. "First, if you actually intend to carry out this dumb scheme, remember the terms. I do not want any communication for the entire year." I could tell it was sinking in for her as she sheepishly said, "I understand, Tom, but everything will work out. You will see. Remember that you promised to give me this year." She waited for my reaction, but I stayed silent. Finally, with a more puzzled expression, she slowly stated, "I really love you." She went in for a kiss, but I turned away just in time, so she settled for a touch on my cheek. I quickly stated, "I can't kiss you knowing you're going to him." She raced out of the house, tears flowing down her face and into his arms, standing at the entrance door. As I watched her passionately embrace him, I felt a wave of hatred within me. 2 minutes later, my driveway was empty, matching the emptiness in my heart, as I learned my wife had become another man's partner. I called in sick from work that morning and went straight to the hardware store to get new locks. I spent the entire morning changing the locks on the house and updating the security codes on the alarm system. Fortunately, it kept me busy and took my mind off Katie. However, as I finished, the melancholy came back, breaking over me like a wave on the shore. Then I did what most people would do in this situation. I turned off our home phone and started drinking heavily. Despite being meant as a means of alleviating the agony of Katie's death, it proved ineffective. My fight with excessive drinking lasted until Sunday a.m., when I ran out of beverages. A relief, since I was physically, spiritually, and psychologically drained. I ultimately went to bed and fell into a deep sleep, only to be woken up by a knock in the house. Groggy, I walked around, attempting to find the source, who turned out to be my daughter Joan tapping on the front door. When I allowed her in, she was taken aback by my state and the strong odor of alcohol throughout the house. Her first words were, "What's going on, Dad?" I fought to focus amid the pounding in my head, but I was able to react. "What do you mean?" She looked at me with a bewildered expression before leading me to the kitchen. "You need coffee and food, Dad. Then you can explain what has happened." An hour later, with food in my stomach and coffee in hand, I told her what I knew about her mother and Greg. To say she was stunned is an understatement. "Dad, please let me clarify. Is Mom planning to take a year off from our marriage to renew things with her old high school boyfriend?" I nodded in accord, saying yes or something along those lines. Her subsequent inquiries echoed those I'd been wrestling with since Friday. "What is your plan, Dad?" I met her eyes, and the word appeared to spill from my lips. "Tomorrow I'll call in ill again and see a lawyer." Joan appeared disappointed and speculated, "I cannot believe Mom would do this. Perhaps it is a mental disorder." I replied with a blank expression. "I really don't know, Joni." She looked at me with a melancholy I had not seen before. "I'm at a loss, Father. I'd like to advise you to reconsider, but this appears to be your best option." Joan stayed with me for a few more hours, even making dinner for later. As she left, she kissed me again and apologized. Before she went, I asked, "Why have you come here today?" She gazed at my eyes. "Mom called and asked me to check on you, but she did not say why or where she was." I nodded, pretending understanding. "All right, thank you." And drive safely, sweetie. I became pretty ill on Monday and also had an appointment with a lawyer. My instincts about Katie were correct, even though the divorce went in my favor since my spouse's resistance prevented her from collecting half of my pension. Other joint assets were unsettled. Now, I'm confident that taking a break from Katie will provide an opportunity to settle those assets. The 3 weeks that followed flew by, and I was amazed at how quickly I adjusted to being alone. On the plus side, I felt a load lifted. I am no longer responsible for another individual. The disadvantage was waking up and going to bed alone. I did not hear from Katie until mid-July. One Saturday, I went to Flynn's, an elegant restaurant in our city, and sat at the bar as they came, holding hands like smitten teens. Their desire for one another was evident. Greg's powerful and reasonably beautiful manner caught my attention while he was unaware of my presence. Understanding Katie's attraction, he appeared to have control over her while she freely complied with his desires. He spoke, and she listened intently as she stood to go to the restroom. When she spotted me at the bar, she offered a cautious smile. When she left the restroom, she approached me hesitantly. "Hello, Tom. How are you?" Despite my desire to dismiss her, I kept etiquette and responded, "Oh, as good as one can be. What can I do for you when your 30-year-old husband abandons you for some pervert?" My scathing remark confused her, but she stayed firm. "Tom, I need to get into our house. I left some personal belongings there, but my key did not work when I attempted to enter the other day." I smiled and responded in a polite manner. "Well, Kat, it should come as no surprise that your key no longer works in my residence." She waited there, bewildered, before I spoke again. "I think you should get back to your partner before he becomes concerned." Tears welled up in her eyes as she turned and walked away, and I returned to the more vital task of completing my beverage. 2 minutes later, I felt a rough touch on my shoulder and was turned around in my chair to face an irritated Greg. "Hey, moron, you made my girlfriend weep, and I do not like it." I felt as if he was about to hit me, and my pulse raced as I thought he could overpower me before aid arrived. With more conviction than I felt, I went on the offensive. "You're referring to my wife, not your woman, and now that you stole her, you have no voice in our business. Smack me if you want, but think about the repercussions for the cops." I could see the wheels spinning in his head, knowing Greg wasn't the smartest tool in the shop. But it only motivated me to continue my verbal assault. "Now you have 2 possibilities. One option is to hit me and end up in prison. Or 2, go out of my sight and sit yourself down." My heart pumped wildly, and a part of my mind yelled, "Why resist?" But as Greg considered his options, I kept up a brave face. Fortunately, the manager stepped in and inquired about the incident. Greg scowled at him before murmuring no worries and slowly retreating toward Katie. 5 minutes later, they paid the bill and left. Driving home that evening, I wondered what personal belongings Katie desired from the house and decided to find out. I spent almost 3 hours searching fruitlessly before discovering cartons beneath her bureau. Underneath them were letters from Greg to Katie. As I read them, it became evident that the affair with Greg had been planned for years. One letter, dated 5 years ago, read, "It's comforting to know that you still miss me. When I return, we will be together. You will need to discover a strategy to get rid of your weak hubby." Reading them all felt like turning through a cheap novel. Many discussed his ambitions for Kat or reminisced about their high school years. By the end, life sans Kat had become noticeably simpler. I did not hear from Kat until September 1st, my birthday. I returned home from work that day and saw a covered dish and a birthday card on the porch. When I took them inside, I realized Mom had made my favorite stew. The letter wished me a happy birthday and included a note that read, "Tom, I know we're not supposed to communicate, but I couldn't ignore your birthday. Every night I dream about us, and I know by the end of the year I will be yours, and he'll be gone. Please do not cease loving me or abandon us. Kat." My daughter Joan had been keeping a tight check on me since Kat's departure, and she called me on my birthday. After some small conversation, she revealed the true reason for the call. "Dad, you know I'm due in 3 weeks, right?" How could I have forgotten the birth of my first grandson? "Yes, I understand, honey. You and Frank must be concerned." When she continued, A little delay made me aware of a potential issue. Dad, Frank, and I shared dinner with Mom and Greg. Mom wants to be there when my baby is delivered, and she wants Greg to join her. I know you and Mom promised not to communicate for a year, but could you please make an exception for me just once? The fact that Joan and her husband had lunch with them shocked me, but I wouldn't ruin the birth of her first child. Okay, Joan, she can come and fetch him if necessary. Joan quickly corrected me. Dad, please stop calling me names. He isn't such an awful guy, and he makes Mom happy. I haven't seen her this happy in years. I was stunned. Then wrath poured through me as I retaliated. Years ago, your grandmother called him names. Nothing has changed. First, you're all eating together. Now you are defending him. I'm not sure what he's up to, but he's steadily ripping my family apart from me. Simply out of curiosity. When will you start calling him Dad? She spoke hastily with sadness in her voice. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean it that way. I can imagine how you feel, and I sincerely apologize. I interrupted her apologies and spoke harshly. It's okay. Forget about it. Listen, I have something in the oven that I need to attend to. Behave. She claimed she loved me before hanging up. It was perhaps at this point that I understood my life would never be the same again, and I needed to refuse. First, I started liquidating my assets to diminish my net worth. Second, I got over my trepidation and re-entered the world. The following days were hectic. First, I sought legal counsel on asset management from my lawyer. Then I purchased self-defense insurance in the shape of a stun gun, ready for any altercation with Greg. Third, I planned a trip to Vegas for October. And fourth, I looked for companionship online, expecting to meet a woman my age looking for a stable, long-term relationship with my possessions. Because my spouse does not live with me, I am free to use them or give them to others. It appears that I am responsible for deciding how to divide our belongings. What piqued my interest about the circumstance was the enormous flexibility it provided in defining my future objectives. During Joan's labor, I was at work, and my secretary answered the phone. Her husband, Frank, was overjoyed to notify me that I had become a grandfather. I immediately went to the hospital after extending my congratulations. When I arrived, I went directly to Joan's room. Approaching the door, I overheard her talk with Katie. Mom, what you and Dad are doing seems completely meaningless. Do you really want to lose him to Greg? Katie's voice was soothing. Don't worry, Joan, I will not lose your father. His love for me is so deep that he will never leave. Besides, what I'm sharing with Greg now is fantastic. It's hard to explain, yet every day feels like high school. It's just better now that we can be physically together. He treats me like a princess and sweeps me off my feet every night. I've never felt such closeness in my life. I'll really miss this when I go back to your father. Joan's voice was full with scorn. Mom, I do not want to hear about your bedtime routine with Greg. I acknowledge that he is an amazing man, and you two appear to be a fantastic match. But I want my child's grandparents to be together, not separated or squabbling. Please, Mom, return to Dad, and you should do it before it's too late. He may be bland and predictable and certainly not in the same league as Greg, but Dad will always be there for you. Greg is undeniably attractive, but all good things must come to an end. On the contrary, Dad is a constant presence. He will not desert you if you do everything correctly. If necessary, beg him on your knees, but persuade him to accept you back. After a little silence, Joan protested vehemently. Mom, don't wait too long or you may lose him. Kat's voice betrayed her misguided niece yet again. You don't have to worry about your father and me. When I'm finished with Greg, he will welcome me back with open arms. Joan's voice was full of doubt. I understand you believe you know Father, but I've seen and spoken with him, and he's changing, and not for the better, it appears. He appears sour and distant since your departure. Are you really willing to risk our 30-year marriage for your high school sweetheart? After hearing enough, I took the chance to enter the room and exclaimed with a false smile, Hello, Mom. Congratulations on your new son. You two must be ecstatic. I stepped up and hugged Joan, disregarding Katie. It was immature of me, but it felt simpler at the time. Katie gave me a foul look, but Joan brightened as she asked, Have you seen him yet, Father? I shake my head. No, honey, I only came to check on you. Katie eventually interjected in an unfriendly tone after becoming tired of the insults. Hello, Tom. How are you? I gazed at her for a moment before returning my attention to Joan, inquiring about the birth and the baby's name when she mentioned it. Joan's face brightened up and she exclaimed joyfully, "Frank and I agree. We intend to name our baby Thomas after you, Dad." Katie sincerely excused herself, saying she was going to see the baby. After she departed, I took Joan's hands and talked in a serious tone. "Joan, you should know that your mother and I are unlikely to reunite." I could see how severely my remarks impacted her. "No, Dad, I do not believe that. She'll come to her senses shortly and return home." My eyes welled up as I proceeded. "Baby, I've realized I was never enough for your mother. Something will occur soon." Her expression was one of shock and astonishment. "What?" I smiled sadly. "I'll start divorce proceedings soon after I've sorted out a few issues." She spoke with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Dad, I told Mom she should beg you to return, but is it too late now?" I nodded in accord. Yes, I will not be able to reconcile with her. The memories of her betrayal would be overwhelming for me. Please don't say anything to her just yet. All right? She nodded before drawing me in for a kiss. We talked for a few more minutes about various issues, carefully avoiding any mention of my wife or her partner. Finally, I promised to visit the next day and let her admire the baby's journey to the children's ward. I discovered my grandchild amid many other newborns. I was amazed by how little and delicate he appeared. Realizing the beauty of the situation, Frank approached me with a smile, standing between Katie, Greg, and me. He gave me a cigar. "Here, Dad, smoke in celebration." I placed the cigar into my pocket and patted Frank on the back. "I'll store it for later, son. Thank you." I felt nauseated as I saw my wife and her lover hold hands like teenagers. "Listen, Frank, I'll come back tomorrow when the air is less busy, is fresher if you get my drift." Frank smiled knowingly. "I absolutely understand, Father, and I don't blame you one bit." As I prepare to leave, Kat timidly called out to me, "Tom, it seems like only yesterday we were bringing our kid home, and now it's unbelievable that he has one of his own. Time flies, but too quickly." I stared at her, still holding Greg's hand, and walked out of the room without saying anything. She seemed perplexed as I left them standing there. October arrived and proved to be my best month since Katie's departure. I went to Vegas with the purpose of playing the tables and losing as an excuse to deplete our collective assets. However, what made the trip truly pleasurable was the woman I met there. Miranda, a senior woman of 50, shocked me with her prolonged career, claiming that many men like older women, and in my case, she was correct. Miranda was expensive, but she made me feel more alive than I have in years. For the first time since Katie departed, I didn't miss her at all. Miranda was skilled both in and out of bed, and she demonstrated a genuine interest in me by inquiring about my soon-to-be ex-wife and her new partner. Miranda knew more about me than I did by the end of the night. Moved by my story, she tenderly caressed my face before departing. "Tom, I have only known you for a few hours, but I feel compelled to tell you something. You're a good person. And that's a rare find, believe me. As I've seen and been with thousands of men, I can count on one hand those I truly liked and respected. You're one of them. Your wife has no clue what she's letting go of. However, don't let her actions and foolishness change who you are. And if you ever find yourself back in town, give me a call because I'd love to see you again." Miranda and my Vegas trip left me more bewildered than when I first arrived. Mulling over Miranda's words, I came to the realization that she was correct. Despite Katie's 3 decades of being a devoted wife and mother prior to her betrayal, I was set on seeking vengeance. No, I refused to let this marriage leave me broken. Upon my return from Vegas, I instructed my lawyer to begin drafting divorce papers. Additionally, I resolved to gather more information about Greg Hollander acting on my lawyer's recommendation. I hired a firm to delve into his background from high school to the present. Despite the firm's hefty fees, I didn't hesitate, knowing half the expenses would be covered by Katie's share. Assured of the firm's thoroughness, I was confident they'd provide all necessary information before Christmas. I also broached the topic of transferring to a branch office of our company, with my boss initially taken aback considering my previous aversion to relocating. My boss promised to look into it and inform me. Thanksgiving loomed as the next obstacle I had to confront. Joan called me about a week before the holidays to invite me to dinner with them. When I inquired about her mother and her companion's presence, she hesitantly confirmed they would be there. Upon hearing this, I firmly declined and ended the call. Surprisingly, my brother-in-law reached out to me. Subsequently, Frank called my office and requested a meeting. We agreed on a time and met at a conveniently located bar in the city center for a quiet drink. That evening, I noticed Frank was agitated. After exchanging initial pleasantries, I ordered 2 double scotches. Sensing something was bothering my son-in-law, I sat back and listened as Frank confided in me about what was happening with my wife and daughter. "Dad, you won't believe it, but they're both infatuated with him. It's all Greg this and Greg that. You'd think he was the guy from the beer commercial, the most interesting man in the world," Frank said before taking a sip of his drink. I was surprised by his frankness and began to wonder why he had come to persuade me to attend Thanksgiving. I needed to understand. So I asked, "Do I understand correctly, Frank, that you don't approve of dear Mr. Hollander?" Frank looked at me with evident anger. "Dad, this man is arrogant, self-centered, selfish, and worse. He's so in love with himself that I can't fathom where he has any room left for Katie." Realizing his outburst, his expression shifted to one of remorse and he quickly retreated. "Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to disrespect." I reassured him with a smile. "No worries, son. Don't be offended. When did you start calling her Katie instead of Mom? You seemed devastated when she left you. Since then, I've lost all respect for her." Now I was curious. Why did her departure affect you, if I may ask? His face flushed with anger once more. "I'm sure you noticed during the time I was with Joan that I never discussed my parents with you guys, and I appreciate that you never inquired about them. The truth is, my mother cheated on my father. After that, they split, and my father never recovered. He drank himself into oblivion, and my mother died in a car accident with her lover. I despise cheaters, and now that Katie has become one, I can't stand her anymore. I'm pretending for Joan's sake. But I'm worried. I had never heard about Frank's parents before and empathized with his pain. Yet I was also intrigued by his apprehension. Frank, you mentioned being worried. What's on your mind, son?" He took a deep sip from his glass, ordered another, then turned to me. "I might upset you with this, but you ask the saying, like mother, like daughter worries me. If Katie has turned into a cheater and keeps praising it to my wife, how long before Joan gets tempted to stray too?" My eyebrows lifted at his concern. "I see where you're coming from." I joined him, taking a contemplative sip of my drink, pondering my next steps. "Listen, Frank, don't lose hope. I have some surprises up my sleeve, and I think things might start to change in the new year. Also, strictly between us. I've got plans to make it a good Christmas for you and Joan, but not so much for the others, if you catch my drift." Frank's smile emerged for the first time since we sat down, and he spent the next 15 minutes trying to pry information from me, to no avail. As we wrapped up our meeting, I smiled again. "Aren't you forgetting something, Frank?" He looked puzzled. "What? Dad?" I put a hand on his shoulder. "Shouldn't you try to persuade me to be a big boy and attend Thanksgiving?" Frank's smile widened. "Oops. Okay. Will you come to Thanksgiving, Dad?" I shook my head in response. "No, but I appreciate the invite. Joan called me twice more before Thanksgiving, pleading for my attendance until I finally put my foot down. Look, Joan, when your mother left me back in June, I made it clear there'd be no contact for a year. She wanted to end our marriage. I've already broken that rule once for little Thomas's birth, but I won't break bread with them. Is that understood?" The holiday arrived, and I had a frozen dinner. I felt lonely and sad, but it beat watching Katie and Greg exchange looks. December arrived, bringing with it the looming prospect of another family holiday. I dreaded it, but I knew it'd be the last one I'd have to endure. December turned out to be eventful. Firstly, the company offered me a position in Spokane, Washington starting in January, and I accepted. Secondly, the private investigator's report on Mr. Hollander came through, and it was revealing. Apparently, old Greg had a history of infidelity with 3 ex-wives divorcing him for infidelity. He also had children from women other than his wives, for whom he paid child support. Furthermore, his last wife received half his pension in the divorce, and he was demoted from an E8 to an E6 in his final year in the Corps. In short, his financial and moral standing appeared rather dubious, if not downright dismal. The latest positive development is that Katie will receive her divorce papers on the first business day after Christmas. Now the old holiday spirit was coursing through me. I phoned Joan to discuss Christmas plans, and once again she pleaded for a true family gathering. When I inquired about Greg's attendance, Joan became irate. "Dad, you need to accept it. He's part of our family now, whether you like it or not." I cut her off abruptly. "You're right. I don't like it, but for the child's sake, I'll be there." Joan appeared genuinely pleased as she exclaimed, "Thank you, Dad. This will make everyone so happy." I doubted that would be the case, but who was I to spoil the fun? 2 days later, upon returning home from work, the phone rang and instinctively I answered, "Hello." The line remained awkwardly silent, and I almost hung up when a voice finally responded. "Tom, it's me." "Kat, what's wrong? Kat, are you hurt?" Her voice sounded hesitant. "No, I'm fine, Tom, but I wanted to thank you for agreeing to come for Christmas. I realize now how much I've hurt you. We've never spent a holiday apart in 30 years. I was miserable at Thanksgiving without you, and I've been reminiscing about us so much lately." I cut short her nostalgic trip. "Well, Katie, I'm glad to hear you reflect on us. However, I must remind you that when you initiated this separation, I insisted on no communication between us. I made an exception for Christmas Day, so I believe we should end this conversation now. Goodbye." After hanging up, I felt awful. I had never spoken to her so harshly in our entire 30-year marriage, but as guilty as I felt about my words, it didn't compare to the day she left me. The month passed slowly, allowing ample time for Christmas shopping. I made sure to buy gifts for everyone. Additionally, I packed belongings for my new job and rented a car for the cross-country drive. I also conversed with a helpful woman at my new office, who informed me she had selected a few well-appointed, furnished apartments near the office. The pleasant surprise was she would personally show them to me upon my arrival in Spokane. Yes, everything was falling into place for me. Arriving at Joan and Frank's on Christmas Day in December, I discovered Katie and her partner had already arrived. Joan warmly embraced me, commenting on the surprise before returning to dinner preparations. I smiled inwardly, thinking, if only she knew what a true surprise this was. Frank greeted me, taking my coat, as I quickly inquired, "Can I see my grandson?" Frank nodded, mentioning the baby was asleep in the nursery, but I could visit quietly. I entered and observed the sleeping figure before me. A surge of emotion washing over me, aware that soon I would depart, but unable to stay. Sensing movement behind me, Katie silently approached and stood beside me. I couldn't help but feel the irony that she should have been here since June. Katie whispered, "We have a wonderful grandson, Tom." Filled with sadness, I replied, "Yes, Katie. But who will he call Grandpa? Me or the fool or both?" Katie seemed taken aback. "Why would you say that?" "You're the only grandfather this child will ever have, Tom," I murmured quietly. "Let's hope you're right, Katie." And then I left the room. The following hours were filled with conversation between Frank and me, while Joan, Kathy, and Greg appeared lost in their own world. I was disappointed at how quickly my daughter fell for Greg's charms. Frank seemed equally unhappy, but I reassured him, promising changes that night. His eyes gleamed as he whispered, "I hope so, Dad. I can't stand that fool around her anymore. At this rate, he'll soon be cozying up to Joan." Dinner was served, and although the food was delicious, the company was lacking. Once again, I felt no desire to converse with my wife or her partner, and Frank seemed hesitant to speak up as well. The only one who spoke was Greg, regaling the women with tales of his bravery. Watching Greg with his small fan club made me feel sick. After dinner, Joan brought the baby into the living room, and we all gathered together. Observing my family, I realized this might be the last time we shared such a moment. Joan seemed happy as she eagerly instructed Frank to distribute gifts. When he did, Joan gave her mom, Greg, and me presents. Katie received a sweater, Greg a gift card, and I received a tie. Practical yet uninspired gifts, much like how my wife and daughter perceived me when Frank, Jane, and the baby unwrapped their presents from Kathy and Greg. Joan smiled and laughed, while Frank remained polite but distant. Once everyone finished opening their gifts, the room fell a bit silent, all eyes turning to me and my bag of presents breaking the silence. I declared to conclude this wonderful weekend. "I want to give you all the gifts you deserve for this holiday." Standing up, I retrieved the bag I had brought and handed Frank and Joan a large envelope wrapped in festive paper. Joan eagerly tore open the wrapping while Frank observed as Joan sifted through the papers inside the envelope. Her joyous scream filled the room upon realizing its contents. Katie shifted in her seat, eager to learn what the papers held. "Waste no time." Joan filled her in, exclaiming, "Mom, Dad gave us your house for free. No mortgage. Now we can move out of this rental. Isn't that amazing?" Katie's expression faltered as she looked at me with concern. "Why did you do this, Tom? Where will we live?" I shot her a piercing look, hoping to convey my feelings. "Don't fret, Katie. I've thought of everything here. This is for you," handing her a card in a wrapped box. I watched as she tore open the paper, revealing a bracelet inside. Surprise painted her face as she pulled it out, prompting me to say, "Take a look at the inscription." I wrote it. Observing Greg's displeasure at her gift, Katie turned the bracelet over, revealing the words, "Thank you for the best 30 years of my life, Tom." I glanced at Greg, noting his frown, while Katie appeared puzzled. "Tom, thank you, dear. This is lovely, but you forgot to write with love." I offered a smile. I didn't forget Katie. I simply chose not to lie. "My love for you has been fading steadily in recent months. This bracelet is my farewell and a reminder of what you sacrificed for your partner. Also, you'll receive divorce papers on Monday." I heard Joan inhale sharply while Katie's face twisted with disbelief and despair. Nodding towards the postcard in the card, I continued. "I attempted to express gratitude for the wonderful years and our daughter. There's also a check for half our liquid assets, though it's not much $195 spent during your absence. The house was intended for my daughter when you left our marriage," explained further in the card. Turning to Greg, I anticipated the brewing storm. "This gift is for you as well." Handing Katie another large envelope, she looked stunned. "Inside is the full account of what your lover has been up to since your high school split. I believe you'll find it an interesting read." Before I could finish, Greg erupted, threatening, "I'll ruin you, you son of a cow!" Greg collapsed to the floor with a thud as my stun weapon made contact, ensuring he remained incapacitated. Joan and Katie stood up, and I administered another 2 shocks to Greg's groin area just to ensure he stayed down. Moving closer to him, I remarked, feeling the pain. "Well, let me tell you, your agony is nothing compared to losing the woman I cherished for 30 years to scum like you." Katie sobbed as if the world was ending when I turned to her. "I know I'm not as exciting as your sergeant, but I won't forget what you did," I said, administering another shock for good measure, relishing in his convulsions. "This never gets old." I glanced back at Katie, summoning more bravado than my shattered heart allowed. "Anyway, since you seem to enjoy this affair, I'm giving you the ultimate gift. Katie, freedom. Now you can live your life being pampered by day and entertained by night. Perfect for a traitor like you, isn't it?" Katie struggled to speak, choking out, "No, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was going to come back to you in June. Tom, I love you." She trembled like a leaf in a storm as Joan rushed to console her, and I zapped Greg once more before Frank intervened nervously. "You shouldn't do that again, Dad. You might wreck. Run him standing over my convulsing nemesis." I looked at the 2 women I loved more than anything. "I'll leave now. Thanks for the lovely day and the wonderful life, as I likely won't see you again, possibly ever." Both women were speechless, staring at me as if I were a stranger. Frank handed me my coat with a satisfied grin. Before leaving, I addressed my daughter, who looked at me with fear for the first time. "Joan, take this as a lesson. If you follow your mother's path, you'll suffer just like she did. You'll lose everything: your husband, your home, your possessions, and the love of your life." Approaching little Tom's crib, I touched his cheek and whispered, "Goodbye, baby. Maybe we'll meet again someday, but I doubt it." Still smiling, I left for the door, bidding the silent room, "Happy New Year, everyone." By the time I reached my car, the shock had likely worn off for the women, or maybe Greg had recovered, but I distinctly heard one desperate voice cry out, "No, this can't be happening to me," starting the engine. I thought about Vegas on my way to Spokane, where seeing Miranda again wouldn't be unwelcome. As I backed out, Frank emerged from the house smiling and waving, and I returned the gesture before driving off into a new life out west. How do you like the first story? Please leave a comment here to let Queen Cheating Tales know. Please enjoy the next story. The note sat there, teasing me with its shortness and permanence. Joey, I'm going to step away for a time. I am not sure how long. This is not about you, just a new person. Please do not attempt to locate or contact me. This is something I need to do. Love, Shelley. Boom, just like that. My entire world turned upside down. 21 years together, and she's gone, within the blink of an eye, disappeared into thin air. I'm Joe Mason, and my wife goes by Michelle, but everyone refers to her as Shelley. We've known each other since elementary school. Our parents share professional environments. Not until our junior year of college did sparks fly between us. Different pathways throughout our early lives. I bounced around different public schools while she did her thing elsewhere. But college altered everything. Senior year, we took the plunge and moved in together. Following graduation, a summer wedding sealed the deal. Shelley, with her upbeat manner, blonde hair, and twinkle in her blue eyes, stands in stark contrast to my more grounded, brown-haired, brown-eyed personality. Professionally, I operate my own legal practice, dabbling in a variety of areas. Shelley, on the other hand, leads a team as a nursing supervisor at the nearby hospital. We're both 42 years old and committed to remaining in shape with gym sessions, hikes, and a little volleyball thrown in for good measure. Shelley is all about aerobic dancing routines in the gym, while I love the raw force of hitting a heavy bag, which serves as both a stress reliever and a strength builder. We have 2 children heading off to college, James, 19, and Susan, who recently turned 18. On a lovely day in April, I received a note and immediately called the kids. James was the first to answer the phone. I informed him about the letter and his reaction. He was as astonished as I was. I pledged to keep him informed, which I did. Susan was next. She accepted it quietly. Not surprising, but it still hurts. It turns out she had a feeling something was awry when she noticed her mother conversing with a coworker at lunch. His name is William Connor, she explained. Did she have any suspicions? Not precisely, just felt a little uneasy. She had doubts, but didn't say anything. Now she blames herself for not speaking up sooner. Don't worry about it, I said, Susan. Accepting the harsh realities, I will take care of it. You simply relax with your family organized. I searched the internet for information about this Connor guy. He is a doctor who worked at Shelley's hospital till recently. He's 40, divorced, and moved from cardiologist to administrator. But here's a twist. He botched a procedure 3 years ago, resulting in someone's death. In the photograph, he appears to be tall, blonde, and robust. However, when I attempted to uncover more recent information about him, I came up empty-handed. Nothing. So I asked for aid from my friend Bill James, who is skilled at discovering stuff online. He agreed to let me know if he discovered something worth investigating. I checked our financial accounts. Shelley had not used the bank account, but her regular deposit did not arrive this month. She had taken nearly all of our savings, more than $200,000 from a Vanguard account. I called Bill again and requested him to trace it, giving him the account information. Then I called Vanguard about the withdrawal, which they said was being processed. The agent said he will get back to me. Our house was jointly owned and valued at roughly $800,000. Perhaps Shelley had a plan in mind. Maybe she wasn't only cheating, but also stealing. On Wednesday, I traveled to her parents' place, which was about 30 miles away. Both cars were parked in front. Mark and Sally Benton had worked with my dad at GMG Enterprises for many years. When I was younger, they spent more time socializing. I've never had a problem with them and believed they raised their daughter nicely until tonight. I knew Shelley was close to her mother. I went up to the front door and knocked. Mark greeted me and was unsurprised to see me. He moved aside and took me to the kitchen in the back, where Sally sat at the table with a glass of water. "Hey, Sally, what's going on? Which I am not aware of?" Mark explained. Sally was largely aware that Shelley was traveling down a bad path. We perceived it that way. She discussed it with her mother, and we agreed not to inform you until she got an opportunity to speak with you directly. Sally, she gave me no opportunity at all, and she depleted our savings. I may have to consider having her arrested for that, unless she returns half of it shortly. Needless to say, I am very furious with her and her companion, Joe. There's no need for that kind of language, Sally added, not very angry. She believes he's her soulmate. And how about you? Because I believe he is a thief, at least with money. I met him once. She brought him here around a month ago. She didn't mention why he was accompanying her and simply introduced him as a coworker. We had a talk at the conclusion. I assumed she was introducing him to her folks. Later, I cautioned her, but she plainly did not listen. I presume you know where she went. Where? We aren't meant to tell you, Joe. She's concerned about how you will react. Sally, Mark, I'll locate her in a few days anyway, and she's exactly correct that I'm reacting negatively. My phone rang while I was there. It was Bill. He told me that Shelley and Connor acquired employment at a Pittsburgh hospital and rented an apartment nearby. They shared a bank account, but the $200,000 hadn't arrived yet. Bill suspected it might be offshore. If that's the case, he can still track it, but at a cost. He promised to keep me updated. Mark and Sally observed me during the call. They noticed me jotting down the hospital, bank, and apartment addresses in a notebook. Bill also provided me their cell phone numbers, which I did not write down. I remembered instead, I did not want them to know I had that information. Sally inquired as to whether she would return and want you back. Will you take her? Why would she do that? She seems to want a complete break, no contact. It doesn't sound like she'll return, except perhaps for money. I think she'll want to come back, Joey, but how long? I don't know if she apologizes right now. Perhaps we can seek counseling. However, the longer she is gone with another man, living as husband and wife with him, well, you know me. Sally, in tears, remarked, I don't want you two to split up. Mark soothed her with a pat on the shoulder. I bid my goodbyes to them as I returned to my office. Bill called again. He added that Vanguard had halted the transfer of the $200,000 owing to potential fraud concerns, and that despite the fact that it was a joint account, the monies had not yet been released. There appeared to be some abnormalities in the transaction. I relayed what they told me when I phoned them. When I called back, I highlighted that the withdrawal was incorrect. They claimed that they had to interrupt the process due to a number of abnormalities. I had a colleague in my office develop an emergency plan. TRO targeted Vanguard, Connor, and Shelley. It took roughly 1 hour. Then I electronically filed it. That should postpone the theft for a while. A temporary restraining order, TRO, is often accompanied by an application for a permanent one. I called my parents in Oregon, where they had retired, and informed them of the situation. They expressed surprise and sympathy. After that, I considered what else I could accomplish and, more significantly, what I wanted to do. I did a brief search and discovered that adultery was not a felony in Pennsylvania, but a misdemeanor in Virginia. That sank in, and I decided to seek assistance, as I typically do when faced with difficult problems. I phoned my mentor, Uncle Jed. He was my mother's older brother and lived near us in Washington, D.C. He used to be a lawyer, but retired a few years back. However, he was more of a source of wisdom for me, not just in law, but in life in general. I asked about visiting him, and we planned a supper together. I decided to get some gourmet pizza and beer to bring to his apartment. While waiting, I contacted a private investigator I knew. I wanted him to find out how long Shelley and Connor had been together, intimately. Perhaps it had been happening for a while, who could tell? I tried to recall whether I had noticed any indicators from Shelley recently that should have alerted me. I'd recently ended a months-long experiment. We had a favorable verdict and were discussing the last details. Perhaps I didn't pay much attention to Shelley during the case, which took around 6 months to complete, including preparation. We still had sex. So we did until approximately a month ago. Then nothing. I should have spotted this before the break. Her reactions had not changed, nor had the frequency. Whether busy or not, I enjoyed being intimate with Shelley. This was hardly my first lengthy trial. After a few weeks, things generally fell into a rhythm and I was less preoccupied at home. On our way to Jed's residence, I visited a clinic to be tested for STDs. Then I grabbed the pizza and beer. Jed greeted me at his door, which I recalled from my boyhood. It was the same house his previous partner had left approximately a year prior. He'd been married for 40 years to Ellen, a great woman who died of pneumonia 5 years ago. Since then, he had been with a few women, but none for very long. Only he was present today. "So, what draws a busy lawyer like you to a town like this?" he asked. I explained, showed him the note, and described the steps I had followed. That's not like her. I want you to sit here for a while and reflect on your life with her and what it has meant to you. I will get something to drink. I will be back shortly. I did what he asked. I thought of all the fantastic times we had. We joked, raised our children, spent time together, and had intimate moments as a pair. I found myself softly crying as I reflected on these recollections. She was in my life for more than 20 years. Yes, we had children, but she was the person I adored and trusted most. Tears flowed down my cheeks as I pondered on our life together, which was now ended. How could she have done this to me? I wound up sobbing into my sleeve. Jed reappeared carrying 2 shot glasses and some whiskey. He just let me cry. He poured the drinks as he finished his shot. I did the same. It was wonderful stuff. It helped me get my mind off things. Looking at him, I responded, "You're very smart. Thanks. Do you want her back?" he asked. "I want my former life back, but it doesn't seem conceivable. I'm not sure whether I want her back. She may hurt me again if I survive this time. What I believe is that you need time to process. Perhaps you need assistance with that. I accomplished something easy, allowing you to alleviate some of your suffering, but you might need more help than I can provide. Besides, I haven't had much luck after Ellen. At least you get some action. Yes, however, it is insufficient when you have received the entire product." Then we spent 2 hours reminiscing about our marriages, back and forth. He also wept tears. But Ellen was lost forever. Shelley's situation was difficult to predict. As our long talk drew to a conclusion, I began to understand that I might not be able to bear to be with her again. I was filled with rage so intense that I believed I would collapse. I rose and stumbled outside. I started striking and kicking an old heavy bag hanging from a tree in my garden. I was possessed by a wrath unlike any I had ever felt before, all aimed at Shelley. I punched her in the face. I kicked her body. Jed viewed the terrible, callous, nasty woman from the porch. He later admitted that he almost called 911 just as he was about to dial. The bag dropped from the tree, propelled by one of my kicks, and sailed over my neighbor's fence. I collapsed on the ground, crying. Jed assisted me inside, attempting to calm me down as much as could. I was completely spent, like a floppy noodle. Despite being physically fit, I had well exceeded my boundaries. I'm not sure how long. He placed me on the couch and covered me with a blanket. I slept through the night. I awoke in the morning to the aroma of bacon and coffee. I rolled off the couch, stood up unsteadily, but eventually got my bearings. I was famished. We had bacon, eggs, and bread together. Then I went to the shower. I ditched my clothing and borrowed Jed's sweatsuit. I shaved, shampooed, and attempted to renew myself. My hands were sore and rough. I applied antibiotic and bandaged them. Shelley had been a nurse and had shown me what to do. My body ached everywhere, and I had a cut over my right eye. I used a butterfly band-aid. I appeared to have been in a severe battle and lost. It had been around 24 hours since I read the note. Jed provided me the name of a marriage counselor that he had previously used, Mary Stevens. He thought she could help me figure things out. He remarked that marriage counseling didn't always require both parties. I accepted the card. I drove home, changed into business gear, and went to the office. The crew observed my looks and stared at me with curiosity. I called a team meeting. We had 12 staff, including 4 additional lawyers. I described what had transpired and advised them that I might not be available until the situation was settled. We made arrangements for replacement counsel to cover some of my office obligations. Surprisingly, I managed to complete some stuff. I ate lunch at my desk and worked tirelessly all afternoon. I departed for home around 5:30 p.m. Shelley had taken some clothes and personal goods, but the most of her belongings were still present. I went to Lowe's and purchased boxes and tape. I organized her belongings, including clothes, books, a photo album, and shoes, into boxes and stowed them in the garage. Because Shelley's automobile was not present, there was room available. I told Bill that Shelley had her car. Next, I walked through the house and removed any images of Shelley, placing them in a trash bag with their frames. I considered the situation and cooked a microwave lunch before going to bed. However, as I was about to fall asleep, I decided to check our home computer and her phone, which was charging. The computer included her emails, but they provided no significant information. Her phone indicated calls to the 540 area code beginning about 6 weeks ago. There were also text messages to and from Connor, also known as Bill or Billy. The communications scheduled lunches and meetings before work, but nothing outwardly incriminating. I went to sleep. On Friday, I returned to work. It had helped me cope the day before and continued to do so. Following lunch, the private investigator called. He sat at a lunch area popular by women from Shelley's department and simply listened in. Unsurprisingly, the disappearance of the CEO and the handsome doctor sparked a heated debate. Prior to their disappearance, there was much suspicion regarding the two. One woman claimed to have seen them leave a motel one afternoon, while another saw them kissing outside a neighboring restaurant. The crew was certain they were romantically involved. The private investigator received documents from the motel indicating that Shelley rented 3 daytime rooms in the weeks leading up to her departure. She paid for them in cash and provided copies of receipts and license plate numbers, 2 of which were hers and 1 not. This prompted me to investigate Connor's finances. Why had he not contributed? I contacted Bill again. It took him around 2 hours to discover that Connor had experienced serious financial difficulties about 10 months before their move. He was late on his mortgage, auto payments, and credit card bills. His hospital income was being garnished due to a divorce and unpaid child support. I recognized that the entire thing could have been about money on his part, specifically the $200,000. Initially, I felt sad for Shelley, but then I became frustrated. I punched an adjacent office chair, generating a scene. My assistant peeked in to check, and I apologized. Next, I made an appointment with the marriage counselor. Then I went to the office of a family law business and requested